Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. I'm so excited to have the panelists that we do today and just so grateful to each and every one of you for making time to join us for this very important conversation on community-driven innovation. This is the first of a three-part series, and so we're super excited to dig in. And we'll just wait for a few minutes for everybody to trickle in and then cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. All right, let's get started. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Um, so there are a couple of things just to be aware of. We are recording today, and this will be available afterwards to all registrants and posted on page. Additionally, if you click on the globe symbol beneath for interpretation, you'll be able to select which language you prefer, English or Spanish. And then also with the CC button, you'll be able to enable closed captioning. We will reserve the latter portion of the webinar for Q&A and robust discussion. And so please use the Zoom Q&A feature for that, and also continue to add questions or comments and reactions in the chat. And then finally, towards the end of the webinar, we will have a brief poll and survey and just be able to share out some of the results again after the session. So with that, I would love to get started and introduce the incredible panel that we have. And so we're joined today by Brenda Aguilera, who is the Director of Community Transformation at Para los Niños, Dewin Hernandez, who is the Program Officer of Deloitte Health Equity Institute, Lourdes Zuniga, who is the Executive Director and Founder of Financial Health Pathways, and also a member of the beta cohort from our Makers residency. And my name is Sheena Nam-McKinley, and I'll be your moderator for today. I'm the Vice President of Research and Development at Healthly. And so I thought it would be really nice to kick off with each of the panelists introducing themselves a little bit more, who they are, the kind of work that they do in the world, and what brought them to that work. And so let's start with Lourdes. You want to share a little bit more about yourself?
Thank you, Sheena, for the invitation, and thank you, Head Leads, for putting together this amazing forum. My name is Lourdes Zuniga. I am originally from Lima, Peru, and I moved to the US about 22 years ago. And as an immigrant, I think that live experience sometimes give you perspective on issues that you didn't even realize that were that impactful, not just as an individual, but as a community member. And being an immigrant in this country and having to navigate a lot of different systems, healthcare system, the financial system, it kind of gave me a perspective of the potential, how difficult it was for me, even with my education that I went to school back home. It was incredible difficult to navigate those systems. So I couldn't imagine other realities for people that really weren't as fortunate as I was to have the education I had, and how much more I can do for those communities and opening access and really addressing systems that really weren't designed for people to be successful, especially for people like me. So that's one of the big, almost epiphanies I have while I was navigating the US and its systems, is to have the opportunity to have my own purpose. And that was to open access for other people like me and communities of color that I represent.
Thanks so much for sharing a little bit about yourself, Lourdes. Do you want to share just a quick little bit about the work that Financial Health Pathways does and what
Yeah.
you did with the Makers residency?
Yes. So Financial Health Pathways is an organization that does financial education. We have asset building initiatives, and we also have a financial justice program that fights the criminalization of poverty. And truly what our organization does is while we deliver some direct services to the community, we are also working like an upstream work to change the systems from, different industries. We are conveners and try to get people at the table to see in what way collectively we can make our systems more inclusive and more equitable. And to that point, and that's exactly what my project was with Health Leads at this cohort, beta cohort that we did, is to really formalize the process and the idea and the vision that we had, that I had about this financial ecosystem, or this economic uh, ecosystem that I had in mind, that will have different stakeholders at the table and collectively work to make our systems more equitable. And that's the project that I developed through the beta cohort.
I'm so excited to have you here and your perspective, Lourdes.
Thank
So I'm
you.
going to hand it over to Dewin. You can share a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sheena. Thank you, Health Leads, for the invitation. Really excited to be here on this panel with this incredible, esteemed professionals here and folks who bring really important perspective on how we can advance health equity. I myself am Dewin Hernandez. I use the He series. I am a first generation Afro-Latino from the Dominican Republic. I grew up in the city of Lawrence, Mass, an enclave of Boston, predominantly Latinx, and raised by a strong Latina mom in a single parent household who instilled a strong sense of purpose to serve and advocate for my community. And it really kind of set a path for me and in my interest in social impact, from providing direct service work in outpatient behavioral health care settings to consulting now at Deloitte with federal health and state and local clients. Currently, I'm serving as a program officer with the Deloitte Health Equity Institute, whose mission is really focused on advancing health equity to make an impact that matters, not only through cross-sector collaborations and building tools to address disparities in the drivers of health, which we know is driven by systemic racism and bias, structural flaws in our health system, but also believing that community really has the perspective to innovate and advance health equity. And so that's a little bit about me and my story and sort of what brings me to the work. But I'm really excited about continuing the conversation and sharing more about how we're collaborating with Health Leads, and really thinking through how we can advance community-driven innovation.
Thanks so much, Dewin. And I know all of the different personal and professional experiences you had will really show up in as we get into the conversation on community-driven innovation. So I'm really grateful for your time here. And then I'm going to hand it over to Brenda to share a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Sheena. And to Health Leads, as Lourdes and Dewin shared, for creating this important space and series. I'm honored to be able to participate in this important conversation with this panel. So I'm, as Sheena shared, my name is Brenda Aguilera, and I'm the Director of Community Transformation para los Niños, a nonprofit in Los Angeles, California, that brings together education, early intervention, mental health, public health, and movement building work to transform systems to better serve the whole child, their families, and their communities. Prior to joining PLN, I was working as a community organizer and a program manager in the labor and workplace movement for a few years. It was, similar to what Lourdes shared, is my family, both of my parents migrated from Zacatecas, Mexico in the 70s. And, they worked really hard their entire lives. And, as kids, we were able to just see how difficult it was for them to navigate the hostile systems that they had to go through on a daily basis just to provide the basics for their family. And I think that really just inspired me to really think about, one is, you um, internalize this oppression and think that there's something wrong with the way that our parents are doing things, possibly, right? And it wasn't until I was in college, thanks to like the Chicano studies courses, where my conscience was raised. And I began to explore that a little bit further to understand the history of these systems that have historically oppressed our communities. And it was through that work that it led me to work in the labor and workplace um, organizing world. And I was introduced to the popular education methodology, and I think that was like a a, a pivotal time for me, because it really demonstrated the power of bringing community members together to really share their experiences, to understand that there's themes and issues that they're all experiencing, and they could really be able to point at like the issue, the root issue of these systemic barriers. So we did a lot of amazing work, and a lot of these day laborers, household workers were able to inform policy changes to really transform their economic conditions and social conditions for their families. And when the opportunity opened up in 2011 at Para los Niños to join, I had never seen, I think a lot of folks in the organizing world had never seen a foundation like First, who funds us, First 5LA Invest, a large amount of resources to be able to do movement building work, where, you know, we were charged with creating a roadmap where we could bring folks that were most impacted by the systemic barriers to work closely with the stakeholders that are responsible for supporting the communities to really transform those conditions. So we, you know, we along with a few partners came along in this effort, and we were able to bring in the popular education methodology, and we knew that this was a real opportunity to create platforms where we could bring those community members most impacted by systemic barriers to share power and to really inform the direction that we're going to move in for the next few years.
Thanks so much for sharing, Brenda. I was just like, it's just, I felt it. I felt all of it in my bones. And so I'm just, it's so powerful, the work that you've done and what your why is in driving all of that. And so I guess really thinking about everything you all have shared, I want to pose the question, really simple, but perhaps complex. What does community-driven innovation mean to each of you, right? I think like these words might be common to some of us, might not be, but they can often bring or sound somewhat buzzwordy, right? And so I think it's really important to just anchor first in what it means for communities to drive, and then also what does innovation mean to you? And I know, Dewin, as a program officer, you're so thoughtful about this, especially as someone who's investing in programs where communities can drive innovation. So I'd love to hear from you in terms of how you define it and what it does and doesn't look like.
Yeah, thanks, Sheena. I think community-driven innovation, for me, really has the potential to unleash the ingenuity and the tenacity of community, and really empowers us to shift our mindsets on how we're even thinking or working with community, and really kind of shifting the frame. Oftentimes, I've observed in philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, really operating from an asset-based frame and really kind of moving to this this deficit-based frame, and the need to really move towards an asset-based frame and really thinking through the strengths that are within community. And I think community-driven innovation and thinking about the solutions that are available within community allows us to really center lived experiences to meet the need and solve these really complex and complex problems. And I believe that community-driven innovation in particular means listening to community stories. And for the Health Equity Institute, we really believe taking a bottoms-up approach to continually engage with community and center their vision will enable us to remain responsive to local conditions, because we recognize that what's working is the people in community, and what's often broken is our approach. And so we really need to follow those who have the lived experience, to also bring those learnings back to the field, and continue to shift our mindset in the ways that we're engaging with community, and even ideating and developing solutions. And so that's one of the pillars that the Health Equity Institute has really anchored on, recognizing that there's a real opportunity to make an impact and really move the needle to advance health equity.
Thanks so much for sharing, Dewin. And it's so powerful to hear about that being a pillar for Deloitte Health Equity Institute, and obviously the connection to communities, and also calling out and forward the importance of time for ideation and really that space of innovation, right? And innovation in a way that matters at most to however communities are defining it, not necessarily how outsiders are defining innovation. So that's so powerful. And I think actually that lends itself well to hearing from you, Brenda, because I know speaking of assets in the community, promotoras are a huge part of the work in the model that community transformation team does in LA County. And I know that you've also embarked on a lot of community-driven innovation in that regard. So maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, yes, so as you shared, and I had shared earlier, when we began our work, we were charged with developing this roadmap. And I think that gave us the opportunity to really drive innovation early on. So through our model, it really ensures that community residents are the drivers of all of our efforts, and in partnership with various stakeholders. That's other nonprofit organizations, city and county departments, elected officials, with foundations, businesses. Like, it's really important that they're also at the table, because they're supposed to be they're supposed to be learning about what's happening in the community. So not only do they work in partnership with the community residents to co-design, implement, communicate, mobilize, and evaluate other systems change strategies. They, do this collectively as in these partnerships in the communities. But the most important piece is that these other stakeholders are also taking those best practices and assessing and reflecting on how they're doing in their own spaces, and that they apply these skills, these practices, along with, bringing in residents to be able to inform how they're practicing it, so that because a lot of them are working with different stakeholders as well. So it's important that they also leverage those practices, so that we really see all of us really shifting our practices and policies in all of our work. So as I shared, we've been able to implement this model successfully for close to 15 years now. It grew from Metro to what we call Best Start Region 1, which includes, if you know the County of Los Angeles, it's huge. So we cover not just Metro Los Angeles, which is like the central part of Los Angeles. We have a community partnership in East Los Angeles, in South El Monte, and in Southeast LA. And every one of these communities are implementing this model, and they work collectively to also work at a regional level. What's been really exciting is in the last few years is that we've been able to partner directly with other organizations, institutions, to support them in adopting the model. So for example, one of the partnerships that we have now is with Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And as you said, Sheena, what's been supporting our model is our promotora model. So they're the capacity builders and the coaches for the residents and the organizations to really adopt the practices of our model. What happens, Children's Hospital Los Angeles was one of those partners, and they were able to see the impact that it was having at a close proximity. We in Metro alone, in Best Start Metro, there's over 500 community residents that are actively leading these efforts with all of these stakeholders. They're leveraging resources, connecting one another to supports, and at the same, and CHLA was struggling with connecting their own families with a lot of concrete supports. So they wanted to explore the adoption of their promotora model. So we were able to onboard a few of the Best Start residents into promoter positions. And they've been implementing this program for now 3 years. And just in the first year alone, there was a drastic increase of seeing the referrals, patient families were the referrals increased from about 22% to 89% in just 1 year with the promotora model, which is really unheard of for the hospital. But a lot of what there was a commitment to also taking those best practices and to sit down with CHJ leadership and their admin folks to understand like what were the changes that need to happen so that they could also look at their internal policies and practices to make those changes to ensure that they're truly serving the communities in the ways that they need to be served. So that's been part of like the commitment and the alignment. Right now we're actually documenting a lot of these best practices in our what we're calling our Transforming Systems of Care manual in partnership with Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, with Health Leads as well, Sheena and her team, and with Laura Valles and Associates. And it also includes an evaluation framework. And this manual and the framework will serve as a guide for institutions to assess where they fall in their own internal capacities, policies, practices, and resources to recruit community health workers that have the skill sets and knowledge and expertise to better serve and respond to the communities they represent, but are often overlooked, undervalued, and or undercompensated by like HR policies, for example, and practices because they don't meet an outdated and unnecessary candidate profile, job description, or requirements. So we're excited to be able to provide health institutions and other institutions with the tools to be able to make that assessment, to really be able to assess where they're at, but also provide them with the tools to be able to make the modifications that are necessary to be able to create equitable practices for the communities that they serve.
It's so powerful. I remember when you were first kind of sharing about your intentions and your vision for this project. You know, I think it was I distinctly remember the conversation where you and your colleagues had kind of shared like, we don't need another evaluation or assessment of the promotoras, right? Like you've been working for years and years and years, day after day, year over year, you know their impact, you see it. Practical wisdom tells you that, like the research has already documented it. You see it, and you named some of the things and the percentage and the referrals and all of that you are able to still monitor and notice. But I remember that conversation because you had kind of named like that doesn't need to be done. Like that's not a problem we're solving. We already know their impact. What we don't have is, and what we need help kind of creating anew is an assessment tool to make sure the conditions for amplifying that promotora impact or the assessment of the institutions as you were describing, the policies and institutions needs to be created, right? And so that was sort of the launch of the project. And I just thought it was so powerful because you kind of took a pause in the way that things could go and sort of flipped it on its head, right? To change the power dynamics. And that was a different way of looking at innovation. So Lourdes, I know you shared a little bit even in your introduction about your work and your approach. What does community-driven innovation mean to you?
You know, that's an interesting question because I think that I can speak for my experience with the organization. Financial Health Pathways, one of our values is innovation. And we really, I took some time to really be intentional in thinking about what does that look like and what's the vision for this and the why do we want to have innovation as a core value. And truly it was very intentional about giving back the power communities must have in designing the systems that are going to rule their lives. And we know our systems have not have communities involved in the designing of those systems. So for us, that's the inequity that we saw. And that's the inequity that as an organization, we want to address. And we want to be somehow perhaps the catalyzer for that change and to flip that and to give back this power that communities should have, or at least a say in those systems that, again, are going to rule their lives. And so when we thought about how innovation is going to play part into that, really is by asking those questions, not to any other stakeholder but the people, the community. And we take best practices on a national level. I try to always make sure that I search enough frameworks so that we don't reinvent the wheel. And if there is nothing in existence, then we truly see that need, and that's where the innovation comes into place. And so we realize that there is really not a lot done in the financial system. And that was for us the opportunity. How can we innovate in a way that if the old systems have not worked, it's because they haven't really taken into account the communities, and particularly communities of color that are underrepresented. And so how do we make those equitable changes? And we noticed that, in the financial system, unless you're wealthy, there is not a lot of services and choices you have. If you have an overdraft, if you're in those communities of color, there are less chances that you're going to build your assets. It's actually the opposite. You're pushed farther into poverty. Same thing with our criminal justice system. If you're a wealthy person, you pay a ticket and then you go free. But if you're someone from low income background and from communities of color, implicitly there is bias against people with no power, financial power, or not even the education to go in front of a judge and defend themselves if you don't have the money to pay for an attorney. So those are the inequities we saw. And so one particular thing that for me was very telling of how powerful it is to have communities involved in the innovation was our recent financial justice program. And this came as an opportunity from a judge, but also a funder that was interested in exploring the opportunity to address the reason a certain demographic was coming through the court repeatedly. And we saw that financial component, or the lack of finances or financial power. And so rather than giving the designing of this solution to the people at the court level, they gave it to us, a community organization. And that was very smart from this funder. And so I designed this financial justice program that serves almost as a diversion program, where people will come to our program, not just to learn about why they have to have a license or insurance or whatever the violation was, but also how to budget to get a license and to pay for insurance, and the reasons why it's important, not just because in the short term you have these consequences, a ticket, maybe you lose your license, but also the long-term consequences. Once you have a record, you can rent an apartment, you can get certain jobs. And so for me, what's remarkable about this program that I designed is that it was driven by community. And the funder put an investment to explore that from a community lens. And so we came out with this program. We piloted in 2019. And to date, this program has been awarded 4 different awards locally and nationwide as best practice in the court system. We have dismissed over 2,500 cases, Class C misdemeanors, and we waive over $700,000 in fines and fees. So when you think about this, what is amazing is that we are changing the way a judge sees people through the court. And for what someone might say, but it's just a ticket. For you, it is. But for communities of color, that is perhaps, what determines whether your family has a roof so they can, be a family, or even food. And so I think that for us, innovating, no one is doing this in our state and perhaps the country. Truly innovation, but it was driven by community. And so now the program has expanded to the Dallas County, and I just came back from training where I'm faculty for judges, and judges are very interested in partnering with our organization, with Financial Health Pathways, and expanding this program even to rural communities. And so this is exactly why I am so passionate about innovation and how community-driven innovation, what it does is it changes systems because it comes with the community as a driver of this innovation. And as a matter of fact, makes more equitable systems. And so I'm very proud of that work. And I'm hoping that we can continue having funders that see the potential and the opportunity in investing in communities with lived experience so that we can have our systems more equitable and a system that actually works for all of us.
You know, as I am reflecting on everything, especially that you shared, Lourdes and Brenda, that you shared, it just is so striking that, um, you know, even one funder that decided to do something a little bit differently, right? That decided to come in early and just um, support communities and listen to communities in what they wanted to create. Um, just thinking about the impact both your organizations have already had, you know, is so incredible. And I know that there needs to be so many more resources, but just again, looking at one investment that did something differently, right? And what that unlocked in terms of potential is so incredible. And I'd love to dig into that because the focus of this first webinar is what it means to invest in community-driven innovation. So I know this is something, Dewin, that you're really thoughtful about, as well as the colleagues at Deloitte Health Equity Institute, as you know, people sitting in that investor role. And you know, we talk about philanthropy, but really just funding sources broadly, right? Whether it's investors or funders, grant makers. What are some ways that you all are really intentional about investing in community-driven innovation?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I just want to thank Lourdes and Brenda for sharing their perspective. And I think it's about accountability and transparency, right? Oftentimes, you know, we're operating within a flawed system, right? And oftentimes it's predicated on some pretty faulty narratives. And we as an institute recognize that there's a need to demystify and even diversify what philanthropy and the role of what funders need to look like. Really recognizing that communities know what community needs. They don't need saving, they really need trust. And I think that's something that we've been really intentional about trying to foster through some of our community voice initiatives and working with our collaborators, really taking a listening posture to try to understand how we can co-create better ways of working with one another and really centering community and their needs, because we know that they're really the experts, right? And my background as a clinical social worker and understanding systems and the need to move from, you know, human-centered design to more equity-centered design, right? Where we're really thinking about the lived experiences and those pain points and removing barriers rather than creating them to really drive innovation, right? I think by listening to their stories, we really can move the needle on health equity. Oftentimes, we are the problem. And so I think that there's a real opportunity here to shift the power dynamic here. And I believe personally that the future of philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, is, you know, going to be driven by, for, and with communities. And even thinking about it more tactically, I think some of the things that we try to do, even as we're scoping and engaging prospective collaborators, is leading with transparency about our strategic priorities and how decisions are made, but also some of the structures and some of the internal, you know, having to navigate that landscape, trying to be mindful of, you know, reporting, right, and requirements. I feel like everyone's so obsessed around impact, right? But we're really thinking about, okay, what is impact, and really widening the aperture and exploring of other ways of even conceptualize or even thinking about impact, and really leaning on our collaborators to help define that for themselves. We're really intentional about developing inclusive processes that center community voice. Like I mentioned, there's an initiative that we've been on, or on a journey really, to get us to a place where we can open the doors and open the realm of opportunity to shift the way that funding is made and the way that it's driven. And then lastly, I think really being intentional about creating space for leaders to take risks and experiment, which is why we're so excited about collaborating with Health Leads, because you all are really focused on supporting early stage entrepreneurs from really at that ideation stage, right? I'll even say from the inspiration phase, right? Just even having, being inspired, right? And using, your lived experience and what you see in your community, or just identifying those needs and getting inspired to even come up with a innovative idea. I think is really, really exciting. And so those are some ways that we've been tactically trying to think through how are we kind of moving and even redefining what we as an institute within the broader Deloitte firm engaging in philanthropic giving, like what does that look like, and how can we kind of redefine what that model looks like for other folks in philanthropy and in funding. So I hope that answers a little bit or gives you an inside scoop.
No, and that's why it's so important. And Lourdes and Brenda have mentioned to have different voices at the table, because we need like insights like yours, and just examples, really concrete examples, things that I heard you speak about doing, or in the everyday, exchanges and just like a one-on-one meeting, how you show up, processes, practices, but also these bigger strategy questions and how you structure grant making reports, your portfolio of investment, all of those things are in play. And you touched on so many facets. And so, I know, Brenda, you experienced this in a different role as you lead your, team and projects and interface with a variety of funders. What would it look like, or what does it mean to you for philanthropy to show up in a way that supports you and the communities, right, that you're collaborating with? What would you love philanthropy to do, and how they should show up?
That's a great question. I appreciate, Devin, what you shared about transparency, trust, and also shared just accountability. There's so many, I see a lot of opportunities right now. Like everyone's trying to really invest in movement building work, systems change efforts. But when you look at the types of outcomes that we're expected to help accomplish, it still feels like our communities are targeted as the problem. It's always about behavior change, in our community. If they behave differently, if they made better decisions, then the conditions would be better. Everything you spoke about, Lourdes, like it's, it could be a simple ticket, like any of us has had has gotten stopped, for committing an accidental wrong turn, right? But it has different implications in our communities, deeper, riskier implications. So I think the one thing, and as you share, as we were discussing, Sheena, with that opportunity with evaluation framework, even when we responded to this opportunity to be able to put this manual together, the expectation was that we are going to shift. We're going to have more referrals. Like we're supposed to see an increase, but we know now that we can never reach 100% referral rate, because the biggest need that I'm sure this is happening across the country. The biggest need is housing. There aren't enough resources to address the housing situation. But so we need to look at the systemic conditions that have created this gap. So that's broader than just what a promotora could do at this point, or that any of us in the organizations could do. So I think this is why it was important to really really focus on the root of these issues with our evaluation framework. Our funder, like I said, it's First 5 Los Angeles. They actually, who I don't know, for folks who are not familiar, it's a statewide county funder that receives all of their funding through the tobacco tax. So the good thing is that there's less smokers, right? So there's been like a lot of efforts to reduce smoking, but that means that our resources are dwindling down drastically. So in the last year, they learned that their fiscal reality is changing drastically. So they've had to take a lot of measures to be able to be more strategic in what their investments are going to be for the next 5 years. So that meant that they had to redo their new strategic plan. They had just approved a strategic plan months before, and then they got the fiscal reality, and that's like they had to pause everything. The one great thing that came out of that is that they actually invited us to the table to be able to inform the design of their new strategic plan. And that was such a great opportunity for not just us. There were other organizations who are not funded by them, but that do this movement building work in Los Angeles County, to be able to bring all the information about what the communities were currently experiencing, to be able to inform how they were going to prioritize and even think about how they were going to measure the success of the strategic plan. So that was an opportunity for us to really hone in on making sure that we were holding institutions and systems accountable, not the community residents that are impacted. That was a big mind shift and the way that they were even thinking about this. So again, like a lot of the work has to be around like changing the way we view these issues, and it has to start with the folks in the systems themselves. So I we're really proud to share that it's one of the strongest strategic plans that I've seen them develop in the close to 15 years that we've been partnering with them. The next phase is that they're going to, in the next couple of months, they're going to design their tactics, which will define what they're going to invest in for the entirety of the strategic plan, which is a 3-year strategic plan. There's a commitment that they'll continue to partner with us. Ideally, we want to see the residents partner in there, but even without the residents there, we're committed to bringing and uplifting everything that the communities have been uplifting over the years and that they're working on. So housing actually made it as one of their priorities. It was nowhere near their top priorities a year ago. But they're really listening. And I think that's one of the things that is that I'm hoping to see in other foundations. I'm hoping First Five could share a lot of those best practices as well. It's like, how are they more transparent and inclusive to be informed and to be led by the communities that they're meant to serve? That's the only way we're going to have like real transformative long-term solutions to these issues.
The only way. Thank you for sharing that, Brenda. And then I'm going to close out with Lourdes's perspective on this. I know you have a lot to say as well in terms of how philanthropy can show up to support community-driven innovation. And then we'll get into the Q&A after that.
You know, I so much appreciate my colleagues' perspective, and I have, been so vocal about philanthropy, and because it's such an important factor in the social impact sector, but it garnishes so much power as recipients of investments. We feel we're supposed to behave in a certain way. We're supposed to talk to funders in a certain way and be at our best behavior. And I feel like sometimes that can be a barrier in the process of collaborating together. Because what is true that this is an investment that they're making in our organizations. It's not for us to just do whatever, right? It's always a transactional investment. They invest for something, and so I don't think that philanthropy had to be based in trust. I think that the old school of we want this for programs, we don't want this for A, Y, or Z. An organization exists because of general expenses as well. It wouldn't be an organization serving and having a program if it wasn't for the operating expenses. So I think that we have to really be careful about how do we expect a dish to be cooked with only this ingredients and not this, and you can't pick, right? And so I hope that, more and more that we're having these conversations about philanthropy, that funders can really think about the expectations they have for us to produce things with just this. It would be a flawed product. And then, being in a practical environment, I always find interesting, if that's the word, to see how less and less foundations and organizations that do make investments make themselves less and less available. This is only by invite, and that the message is saying you're not welcome. We only want to fund the people that is in our bubble. And that actually is pretty detrimental to innovation and to players that are coming into the space that really want to innovate because they have nothing to lose. They're not big organizations, so they don't have that brand equity. So if they fail, they fail. So I think that organizations that make investments and philanthropic organizations more and more should, just the way we Google foundations to get a grant, what about foundations Googling organizations that are doing work in this, with these issues, and say, you know what, I didn't know about this organization and I don't even fund them. I want to get a meet and greet with them. How about switching that power dynamic that we go after the money, so we Google you? Why don't they have a meet and greet and said, we want to invite to this meet and greet to all the organizations that we don't currently fund? Because that's a way that you get out there and you start seeing who are the players that are having like impactful work. And so I think more and more, just having even the mindset of accepting exploration, accepting that there is no end goal. We don't promise you this for this investment. This is just an exploration of what would it look like if we do this, let's say the promotoras framework. And so I think that once we start looking at things that way from a philanthropic perspective, I think that we can actually say, we are partners in this. If we have a rough year, let's see how we can produce solutions. And if anything, if something is goes into exploration process and nothing comes out of it, it is still a learning experience of what not to do. So I think that is not in vain. And I guess just having the trust in communities that they are producing solutions for those problems, I think that should be a good indicator that the investment was well made.
Yeah, thank you all. We have a lot of great questions coming up in the chat, and then also I know some of the people in the audience have submitted questions even upon registering. So we're going to get started there. Maybe a good question to start off with, and I think all of you have touched on this in different ways, but we can dive in, is distinguishing what community-driven means to you. You've spoken on this a little bit, but is it informed by communities where you get information to make decisions, or is it led by communities where they make decisions and implement the work? And I know you all have touched on this, and so maybe a different way to dive into that would be, what does it take to communicate or to do the day-to-day work to support that incremental change for institutions to shift power dynamics, right? Or to see what we often call at Health Lead seeding and seeding power, CEDE and SEED. And so, when we move from more just communities kind of informing or giving feedback to truly driving, what are some things that have to take place, and how do you kind of do that? Because some of those big structural shifts can't and don't happen overnight, right? And so what does that look like? Dewin, I'm curious from your lens as a program officer, what does that look like in the kind of the short-term incremental changes towards a longer arc? And then Lourdes and Brenda, from where you sit, you are the other side of that equation, doing that work over 15 years, Brenda, right? Working in conversation, Lourdes, the entire trajectory of financial health pathways, making sure that power dynamic is shifting? What are some kind of day-to-day ways that you do that?
Yeah, I think I can kick us off. I think one of the things that I know that I try to do and be intentional about is even for leaders and folks who are in the space, being able to educate, right, and kind of socialize and share truly what it's going to take to solve these really hairy, sort of wicked problems. And recognizing that the solution, there's a lot of folks in academia, there's a lot of folks who have, quote unquote expertise, but oftentimes they're not leaning into the folks who are experiencing these challenges directly. And I know for myself, just coming from where I come from, being first generation, being an immigrant to this country, having to navigate these complex systems, and even thinking through, like, as a clinician, interventions, right? And like evidence-based practices. And oftentimes it lacks cultural congruence. It lacks really taking an intersectional approach and understanding, like, how are these issues sort of compounding, and how are we really thinking through in supporting those who are at the forefront of these issues, and inviting them into the conversation. And so I think it's incremental because of the systems that we're operating within, but the hope and the aspiration, I would say, is to have it be driven by, led, and with communities. And that is something that I know internally, and I think externally, and folks who are even in this position are actively advocating for, in hopes that, we will reach that future state. So that's really a journey, to be frank. But my hope is that we'll get there one day.
I also think that why does it have to be one way or the other, right? I think that as different stakeholders, in some cases, like CBOs and other social impact organizations can be community driven and community informed. But let's say government, we collaborate a lot with government. And so perhaps they are not going to be community led, but that's why organizations like our organizations exist, is that we serve as the accountability partner for government to have that community informed. Not every organization is going to have both, but ideally, I think as long as you have a component of community and you're engaging with communities, that's powerful in itself. But as different stakeholders are have different structures and different protocols, I think that it doesn't have to be one way or the other. It can be both. It can be one component. And the way that we do incremental, I think, is more transformational. What I call is that because of that community lens that our organizations have, I think that you can adjust as you go. Let's say our justice program, we started with traffic offenses, and now it has evolved to juvenile services. It has evolved to other small cases that are similar to Class C misdemeanors. And so because we saw the need, so we've been adjusting this and open it up for more access. So we are incrementing and perfecting the service because we're taking the community feedback, like people that we serve, but also stakeholders around that say, oh, have you thought about this? So those are small changes that over time make the program what it is now, and we will continue to do that. So we offer more follow-up surveys, focus groups. We keep adding things because we are past the proof of concept. Now we know that it works. We know that it's being recognized at a core level, and similar with our other programs. So we are trying to always take the temperature of the community, because if an organization has been founded like 10 years ago and you don't check yourself constantly for quality, and also like the taking the temperature of the community and what are the needs now, there might not be the ones that were 10 years ago. So as you evolve as an organization that fails to evolve, I think it will get stuck in the past, and you're no longer serving the community. You're actually just continuing something that started like a great idea, but is no longer fulfilling a need.
Brenda, do you want to share a little bit about just like the arc of supporting maybe even the incremental change as you work with different funders and narrating the changes that need to happen?
That's such an interesting question again, because I recognize that you know, we've been privileged to have access to these resources for, again, close to 15 years, which is unheard of. There aren't investments like this that where there's a funder that's committed. And I'll be honest, like, it wasn't supposed to be a 15-year commitment. There was a 5-year commitment. First 5 was still trying to figure out what to do, how to move, and that gave us time. I think that's part of the issue as well, like how there isn't a long-term investment that needs to be made. I think we're set up to constantly um, compete with one another for these types of resources. We have to, you know, redo this work all over again, and we drag communities through this. I think that was one of like the earliest feedback we got when we were trying to recruit community members to be part of this. There was another investment that was being invested in the same community, and it had like the same timeline and the same deadline as well. So, and then that felt competitive. Like people are trying to recruit members, and you know, which I think it allowed us to have conversations with the organizations to say, how do we leverage this instead of create more competition and confusion for the community residents? But what the residents shared is like, there's always startups. There's like the stop and go, the reserving. I've already shared this information about my needs. Why are you constantly asking us the same thing and it goes nowhere? I think that was a feedback that we took back to the funder. And I think that's where I see our role is that we have to be persistent and continue to push and to find the allies within these institutions um, and organizations, because you know we're talking about like again like a shift in mindset and practices of organizations themselves, and that means like even with our peers, right? Because I think we all we don't clearly define what we mean by partnering with communities, and we're all operating under different assumptions, different practices, where some of us may you know possibly tokenize residents at the same time without knowing that we're doing that as well. I think it's been important to have those ongoing conversations with the partners, with you know making sure that they're in the spaces to hear directly from residents, so that they're hearing directly from them and it's not being filtered through me, or that it sounds like it's more about my perspective on it. But then having you know ongoing conversations through lunch, through like meeting for coffee, to really be able to unpack all of this, because it is slow. You know, we're talking about unlearning a lot of these beliefs and behaviors. So I think that's what has allowed us, and that we've been very intentional about being able to have that direct communication and informing our partners, foundations, and everyone else that's a part of this, and that we're inviting and that are really invested. And now we have like tons of champions, like organizations themselves that share their own journey with a lot of other organizations, and that's like the best case scenario, because they need to hear from other peers, not just the folks that are leading it, but the folks that have been transformed as a result of it. And that's how I see that we've been able to influence and shift the way that our funder themselves work. There's still a lot of work to do, but again, like I see their investment right now in this movement building effort, even with the reduction of funds. So it does become part of the work, a big part of it.
That's so powerful. We have delved into so much in this hour, and I know there's so much more we can share. So luckily we do have more time. You can come join us for the part 2 and part 3 of this webinar series, where we will do a deep dive. Hopefully, people have been able to share and take away really concrete practices, but we'll do even more of a deep dive in February and March. We got a couple questions around specific resources, for example, around the Promotora model, so we can share that out after this webinar, and you can also join us specifically for that March 12th session as we dive into that assessment tool. A great question around co-design with children, and so we can also include that in resources after the webinar. So we really hope to continue this important conversation and are so grateful to our panelists and each of you who spent time this past hour delving into this. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day.